Hello everyone. Today I thought I would discuss a funny, alleged refutation of Ayn Rand I saw. It's funny, the more you understand the truth, the harder it is to understand how people make mistakes. So it actually took me a little while to understand just what the
And the Lord God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helpmeet for him."
What? No, Jordan, I already discussed you enough, at least for now, so I'm going to deal with this other thing for now.
And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all the cattle, and the fowl of cattle means animals basically, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helpmeet for him. Okay, well, a couple of things there.
I don't like the way you said that, Jordan. Couple of things there, as if you mean it in a way akin to false modesty. Oh, just a couple of small things, but they're actually going to be big things. Okay, Jordan, if you really want to talk about this, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. What do you have for me?
Speculations.
So the usual then.
Number one, it's like, why does God care what Adam calls the animals? And the answer to that seems to be that it's associated again with the magic of speech.
Speech is not magic, Jordan. Now, maybe I should give you the benefit of the doubt here, and you don't actually mean magic. I'm skeptical, but I'm willing to see where this goes and take this as just a poetic way of talking about the utility of speech. So don't make me regret giving you this chance.
Right, so that we know, according to the story, that human beings were already made in the image of God, and that God used language in order to call order forth from chaos, and that human beings were made in that image. And so there's an echo of that here, even though it's from an independent tradition. And the echo is, the thing isn't quite real till you name it.
Yes, it is. It is real, even before you name it. Now again, maybe you mean this in some poetic way, so let's see where you're going with this.
And that's an interesting thing, and we don't exactly know how far that extends.
Well, we know literally how far that extends, but again, I'll give you some forbearance and assume you're being poetic here.
It's certainly the case that things often exist in a strange potential form, interconnected form, where everything's confusing, like a massive confusion. Before you put your finger on it, name it. What's going on here? You name it. It's like it carves it out from all that underlying chaos and makes it into a grippable entity that you can then contend with.
Yes, this is a very important point, assuming you don't mean it literally. That is exactly what people do. When you conceptualize a phenomenon or make a generalization, when you demarcate abstract boundaries, you make something dealable with in a way it wasn't before. For instance, I remember I used to work with a guy, and one day it occurred to me that he was the kind of person people call a blowhard. And I knew the word before then, of course, and I knew its abstract definition, but I didn't know its concrete meaning until I fleshed it out by conceptually identifying this guy as belonging in that category. And it's true, once you form a concept, once you say, oh, this bit of reality, this range of reality should be cordoned off from the other parts of reality because of its unique biological significance to me, because of its survival relevance to me. Yes, you start to be able to deal with it and think about it in a way you couldn't before. It's like noticing that women get annoyed on their periods. Now, you can know all of the pieces of that independently. You can know about women, you can know about periods, you can know that specific women you know get annoyed, but as soon as you generalize, as soon as you recognize the causal relationship involved, you draw a line from this property, the state of the body while it's on its period, the female body, you draw a line from that cause to the effect of her being annoyed and emotional. You're drawing a line around this relationship. It's not just this loose flux anymore where you have actions and effects over here floating around and you don't know what's causing them, and you have properties and natures and identities over here and you don't know what their effects are. No, you see the world clearly now, cleanly. And that makes the world graspable. It makes you efficacious, competent. You can now act with knowledge of what the effect of your action is going to be, and that's great. And doing that conceptually is just an abstract version of what your neurophysiological system does automatically. It automatically discriminates entities for you. So you see this table as an entity, right? You don't see all of the nitrogen, oxygen floating around it, all the air. Why not? Because through natural selection, you have evolved based on the survival significance of being able to see the table in isolation, seeing the things that it integrates, or is an integration of, as opposed to the colorless air around it. Now, what Jordan Peterson seems to be saying here is that is subjective, and reality is all just one continuous thing until we see it, either automatically through our sensory systems or even abstractly when we conceptualize something. And it's true, reality is simultaneous and it's all connected, but nonetheless, the table really does have the properties it has that differentiate it as an entity from the air around it, or if you submerge it in water, from the water around it, or if you put a bunch of packing peanuts around it, from the entities that are those packing peanuts. Now you say, well, why do we privilege this over any other combination? Well, we privilege it because it's relevant to us. Reality doesn't privilege it. To us, a table or a tree or a rock, that is a primary entity because it's something we can see directly. Now, you can say the galaxy from the perspective of the universe, even though it doesn't have a perspective, but from this kind of no perspective, you can probably see the galaxy as a universe. It coheres in a way. You can see atoms as entities. So primary entity is an objective relationship between human beings and things out there. So yes, all of existence exists in an interconnected way. Everything is connected, even physically. I mean, it's not glued together, but there's no empty space. There's physical stuff everywhere, even where you can't see it. So why do we privilege the distinctions our bodies make for us, or that we conceptualize, over just the undifferentiated mass in reality? Well, because it's useful for us to differentiate rocks from dirt and air. We know we can use a rock to hit somebody over the head with, or to make a tool out of, or whatever. And identifying the rock as a thing different from the things around it, as an entity, that's relevant to us. So it is a human perspective, but it's not subjective. The rock really is an entity in that way. So anyway, yes, in a manner of speaking, on our perceptual and conceptual level, our modes of awareness differentiate things. They separate them out. They say, this thing here, as against everything else around it. They discriminate. We live in a world of discriminated entities. That's what they do, and they allow us to deal with the world coherently. So, again, this is tentatively good, Jordan, assuming you don't go off the rails here into some false metaphysics.
And you might say, well, it was real before you named it.
That is exactly what I would say.
Well, yes, it was real before you named it, the same way things are there when there's no one there to perceive them.
So 100% there and 100% real.
And it isn't obvious how things are there when you're not there to perceive them.
Yes, it is, Jordan. Yes, it is. It is obvious how things are there when you're not there to perceive them. It is not simply obvious. It is not merely obvious. It is the most obvious thing possible in the universe. It is so profoundly obvious that animals grasp this on the same level that many human beings do. The fact that things exist independent of your consciousness, is the first thing of which you are aware. It is the very first thing of which you are aware. In any act of awareness, you are aware, oh, something exists and I'm aware of it. Just axiomatic, self-evident. There is literally nothing more obvious than this, Jordan.
I'll tell you something bloody weird about perception. You can look this up. John Wheeler's a physicist. So here's a really cool thing. Let's say you go outside at night and you look up and you see a star. And so a photon from that star enters your eye. And maybe that photon has been cruising along for 30 million years. Do you know that that photon would not have been emitted from that star at that time if your eye wasn't there at that time to receive it?
No, I don't know that. And neither do you, and neither does anyone, because it's not true.
You think, well, how in the hell can that be? Because it happened 20 million years ago. It's like, well, I don't know how it can be, to tell you the truth, but I know that John Wheeler has done a very good job of detailing out why that's true and necessarily true. And so Wheeler is also the physicist who developed the notion of it from bit, and he believes that the world is best construed as the potential of the world is best construed as a place of information. It's something like latent information, and that what consciousness does is transform the latent information into something like concrete reality. And he doesn't mean that metaphorically, and one of the cases that he makes in that regard is this story that I just told you, is that the photon couldn't have leapt from where it was unless it had a place to go.
Oh, Jordan. Yes, Jordan. Pythagoreanism has been recapitulated throughout history many times. This is nothing new. This goes back thousands of years. It is just as false as it was when Pythagoras allegedly made this claim, or his adherents. No, the fundamental nature of the world is not geometrical patterns or numbers or bits. That is the primacy of consciousness. That is the idea that things in the mind create reality. You know, it's interesting. They're not just saying that physical stuff comes from non-physical stuff, that material reality comes from non-material reality, which would also be false. The world is made up of entities. It is incoherent to talk about action or properties without entities that act or have properties. Now, as I said before, the entities of which we are primarily aware, first aware, there's nothing metaphysically privileged about that. Atoms are just as real as tables. But no matter how deep you go, no matter how small you get, no matter how subatomic, the basic stuff will be an entity. The universe is made of entities on every level. But they never just say it's immaterial stuff. It's always some kind of mental content. You know, Plato's theory of forms. It's called the theory of ideas sometimes. It's related to the Greek word that has some relationship to the English word idea. And geometrical patterns are what? Those are abstractions from reality that we form in our mind. Same thing with math, numbers. So it's never just, well, there's some immaterial stuff out here and that creates reality. It's always something to do with consciousness. The world is a world of information. What is information? That which informs. What gets informed? Consciousness. It's always a primacy of consciousness view. The contents of consciousness create reality. You see this with this stupid particle example, where, oh no, this wouldn't have existed, it wouldn't have come if there weren't somebody to perceive it. The mind creates reality. The contents of the mind create the physical world. It's not just immateriality creating materiality. It's the mind creating the physical world. And that is, of course, not how the world works. Existence exists and we are aware of it. The relationship is precisely the opposite. The mind does not create the world. The mind identifies and is aware of the world.
Now, it's complicated and confusing because from the perspective of a beam of light, from a photon, there is no time and there's no distance from one point to another. When, of course, that's completely impossible to understand too. But from the perspective of a photon, the universe is completely flat, perpendicular to the direction that the photon is traveling. So it's there and here at the same time. For us, it's not. It's like 20 million years ago. But for the photon, it's all here and now. So anyways, the reason I'm telling you all that is because the relationship between consciousness and reality is by no means straightforward.
Yes, it is.
It is seriously not straightforward.
Yes, it is seriously straightforward. Reality exists, and consciousness is aware of it. That's the relationship. I have to say, just as a bit of psychologizing here, the fact that he emphasizes this makes me think that he knows on some level that this is a very dubious premise. And so he's emphasizing it strongly as a kind of empty gesture, as if his saying it will make it true, which, incidentally, is the kind of, not incidentally, which significantly is the kind of thing that somebody who believes that consciousness creates reality would do.
And physicists debate what the relationship is between consciousness and reality, and they debate about what the sort of phenomena that I just described mean, and I'm not really qualified to enter into that debate because I'm not a physicist.
Everyone is qualified to enter this debate, Jordan. This is the realm of philosophy, not physics. Discovering or rather identifying the relationship between consciousness and existence is not the job of physicists. The job of a physicist is to study the nature of matter and motion, not to tell us the relationship between the mind and existence. If you have a question about that, you are not yet ready to do physics. Now, this goes to something people just don't understand. Philosophy, not only is it valuable, which people doubt, but it precedes physics. It precedes all science. So people have this idea, philosophy, that's all hot air, we don't need that, throw it out. Well, let's just go by the data. Look, the data says. We're just using science. We're just looking at the world and we're going by the data. But how you interpret the data depends on your philosophical premises regarding the nature of the world. So when you get nonsense like quantum mechanics, you have to understand that the bizarre interpretations of that you hear are based on the philosophy that was held prior to the data. It's a naive view that you can just, let's just look at the data and that'll be that. It's this idea that there is no such thing as logic, there's no such thing as method, no such thing as a way you think about the world. It's just you have the facts and that's that. Yes, there are the facts, and that's that, in a manner of speaking, but you also have to integrate the facts, think about the facts, in a manner that accords with reality, and that is, it's possible not to do that, and most people don't do that. So, let's take, the stupid idea people have about you put a clock, you run it at these speeds, and it comes back and it's a minute slower. So people say, that proves Einstein's theory of relativity. That's it. And then you say, I disagree with relativity. I don't think the interpretation of what's going on there is correct. And they say, what are you, some kind of science denier? The data's right there. It's just a straightforward, we looked at the data, obviously Einstein's right, the end, case closed. No. This is like saying, okay, we observe the tides, right? Well, my theory is that there's a giant dragon in the ocean, and it wakes up at certain times and rolls around, and that's what causes the tides. And now somebody comes along and says, that doesn't make sense. We have no evidence that there's a giant dragon in the ocean causing the tides. And then you say, what are you, some kind of tide denier? Look, the tides are right there. Are you denying that? No. I am denying your identification of what is causally going on. So in the case of relativity, Einstein's idea is that time itself dilates, which is incoherent and stupid. Einstein was a fan of thought experiments. He was just a major rationalist. I'm not saying he wasn't a genius, but his philosophical perspective was wrong and made his theory wrong. Time does not dilate. Time is a measurement of motion. You may as well say length dilates, which they do because they think space dilates. No, these are relational concepts and concepts of measurement. They're not things that have causal effects. That's called reification, where you take a property or an abstract relationship and you make it into a thing. That's what Einstein did with space and time. That is not correct. Now, obviously, the data is true. The clock does slow down when it goes at these speeds, or it travels in these contexts. But that is not because time is dilating. You know Hendrik Lorentz, the man who discovered some of Einstein's most important equations before Einstein did. His theory was one that actually accords with philosophy, that there's a physical stuff out there, and it is having a physical impact on the mechanics of the clock, on the materials that make up the clock, that is slowing it down. So when the clock goes through this stuff, it is having a physical interaction. It's not time dilating. It's the interaction of physical things. But of course that was thrown out and we all believe Einstein. Why? Not because of the data. Because his view fits with our philosophical misconceptions, our false philosophical premises, the false philosophical premises of the 20th century and today. You know, if you measure something with, let's say, a ruler, and it expands if it's heated, you have to account for the expansion of the tool of measurement. That's exactly what's going on with this clock. Everybody likes to use the example of the clock to prove relativity and time dilates. No, there's some physical thing going on there affecting the measurements. Obviously, the effect is real, but the cause is not some reified, spooky entity doing things. It's something like the measuring stick heating up and expanding. It's just a physical change in the tools of measurement. There's some physical cause going on. But this whole thing Peterson is going on about, I call this the argumentum ad quantum. It's the argument from quantum physics. You see this all the time. I'm doing a video on Sam Harris. He does the same thing. Deepak Chopra does this. Now, I'm sure Sam would not like to be in the company of Deepak Chopra, but they are fundamentally similar. People do this all the time. If you have any idea that makes no sense, then you spout that idea and then you say, well, yeah, maybe my idea doesn't make sense, but reality doesn't make sense on the subatomic level, so that actually proves my point. What I'm saying is actually in line with reality. This view of quantum physics, that identity and causality don't apply on the subatomic level, which is totally false. This view, I mean, it makes possible nonsense, like you're seeing Jordan Peterson say here. Just the most inane, obviously wrong garbage. But why does it get a pass? Why does he feel free to say this, even though he admits he doesn't understand it? Because of the prestige of science, which it would never have gotten if it had always been done like it is today. You can't even call this science. You cannot just state any illogical claim and then say, well, quantum physics is illogical, so therefore maybe I'm right. No. Now, I'm not saying this is a popular misconception of quantum physics. This is what people actually believe. I mean, even the physicists themselves, they actually believe this nonsense. And you see the results of their wrongness. It has led to all kinds of acceptance of Eastern mysticism and just the lowest dreck you could imagine. I mean, you see this. It's a cliche at this point, the unity of the Eastern ancient wisdom with quantum physics. Oh, we're finally getting with our science to the wisdom these disgusting primitives' wisdom they had thousands of years ago. No, we're not. We've just adopted their irrational philosophy, and it is corrupting our physics. And so now, because people have this naive view that, well, we just got all this from the data, which is incoherent, but they have this view, and so now they think, oh, well, I guess religion was right all along. No. Whether you think the world exists independent of consciousness or not precedes your acquisition of data. How you interpret data depends upon your answer to that question. You cannot use scientific data to prove one way or another whether the world is external to consciousness. How would you even do that? Hopefully you can see how that doesn't make any sense, because the premise is already there. You have to know what you're looking at before you can use the data. The data is observation. You have to know the nature of observation before you can use it to prove anything. This is a philosophic issue. It is not an issue for physicists. And physicists have chosen the wrong answer for a long time now. And it has corrupted their interpretation of the data they have acquired. Which, of course, I don't argue with. I'm not saying the data is wrong. This is the dragon in the ocean idea. You know, in 500 years, assuming humanity is still around, people are going to look back and say, wow, physics, the whole culture took a delusional detour at this point. Look at what all their scientists are saying. Look at their science fiction. It is filled with all this nonsense.
But I do know, and I've read a fair bit of Wheeler, about as much of it as I can understand, and I do at least know that that's what he claimed. And I also know that that claim is not, that's a claim that's taken seriously among physicists of the caliber of the physicists who can understand Wheeler. So that's pretty interesting. So anyways, there is emphasis again on this importance of naming in order to make things real. You know, and sometimes people won't name things just so they don't become real. So, you know, if you have a relationship, which undoubtedly you do, and it has problems, which undoubtedly it does, you bloody well know that lots of times there's something under the carpet that no one wants to name, and everybody's thinking, well, as long as we don't name it, it's not really there. And in some sense, it really isn't there, because you can act as if it's not there and get away with it, at least for short periods of time. But as soon as you name that thing, it's like you give it form and it's there and no one can ignore it. And that's annoying, because then you have to deal with it or face the consequences. But the reason I'm telling you that is because we have an intuition even that we can have things not exist by not naming them. You name it and it comes forward with staggering clarity. And it's not as if naming it is the only thing that gives it reality, but it is something like it. It sharpens it and brings it into focus and gives it borders and barriers, and borders and boundaries. And
So he's hedging here, but you see the results of this kind of thinking. If something isn't real until you name it, you can just ignore it, and then it isn't real. This is the actual cash value of these ideas. This is why these abstract ideas are so important, even though they may seem esoteric, and like they aren't that important. They are. They cash themselves out people cash them out in practical, daily terms. All Jordan Peterson is talking about here, all he is talking about, is a way of rationalizing ignoring your problems. That's it. That's all this means. He's rationalizing emotionalism, hope, faith, the idea that your consciousness has metaphysical potency. That will lead to disaster if you take it seriously. You know, Ayn Rand said that all evil philosophies are systems of rationalization. That is profoundly true. The bottom line of any evil philosophy is, go with your gut, don't use reason. Just do it. Or don't do it. Just do what you feel like, which can include not doing anything.
anyways, God's interested enough in what Adam has to say that he has him name all the animals, and that sort of makes them into animals. Now, there's more to the linguistic story than that. So the social psychologist Roger Brown was one of them, studied this really interesting phenomena which is associated with the relationship between perception and action. You know how a kid will call a particular animal a cat? Well, the word cat is very short, like the word dog. And it turns out that, you know, you could think that we could perceive cats as multicellular organisms. Like we could see the cells, we could see the molecules, we could see the atoms, we could see the ecosystem that the cat is part of. But we don't, or maybe the broader mammalian classification that it's part of. We could perceive that as the unit of perception, but we don't. We perceive things at the level of cat. And you can tell the perceptual level that people naturally perceive at which doesn't seem to be socioculturally determined to any great degree, by the way, because the words are often short and easily remembered and early learned. And so there's this level of analysis. Out of all the possible levels of analysis that the world does exist at, we perceive it at a certain level of analysis, and that level of analysis seems to have something to do with the world's functional utility for us at that level.
Yes, Jordan, that's exactly right. Good job, yes. I'm glad you see it now. You have some profound understanding there. That's all right.
And the perception at that level and the naming at that level gives things a reality at that level.
No, Jordan, stop. You had it.
You know, because the thing about things is that they're not easily separable from other things. They tangle together in all sorts of strange ways. And yet when we cast our eye and use our language to orient ourselves in the world, we cut things up into discrete, discriminable objects that we can then utilize. And there's something about that that makes them real in a way that their interconnected potential, the interconnected potential that they were before that it's not real in the same way, at least. I think it's even less real. I think that's a right way of thinking about it, even though it's not completely unreal.
Are you finished?
It's an echo. Adam's a little God at that point, a little God the Father, and God's already done the groundwork, but Adam has to come along and say, well, that's a cat. It's like, poof, whatever that is now a cat, and that's a dog, and that's a sheep, and you know, it gives them something like pragmatic form.
No, Jordan. Reality does not have a potential that consciousness actualizes. We recognize reality. We identify it. Now, what he's saying is precisely right. Reality exists on multiple levels. It's all simultaneous. It's all entities, but it's all simultaneous. And the reason we see a cat rather than an atom or a galaxy is because that's the level we exist on first. And so it's true. The level on which we have our awareness has biological relevance. Our forms of awareness, in effect, select the relevant parts of reality, relevant to our survival. Selection is not creation. Reality is out there, and we are identifying it. Yes, we're highlighting the parts that are relevant to us, but that is not creation. That's not pragmatic. That's not subjective. And it really is like highlighting. Like, when you highlight a line in a book, you are using the yellow to contrast against the white background. Now, every line in that book is really there, but you choose the ones to highlight that are relevant to your test or whatever you're studying for. So you can't get it wrong. Perception can't be wrong, but choosing the right one is still an issue. Discrimination, whether conceptual, volitional, or perceptual, carries with it an implicit statement. I am demarcating here, I am isolating here, I am separating this kind of thing from that kind of thing because it's relevant to my life. So the way Jordan Peterson's thinking about it is, the fact that you are doing this on the basis of values somehow means you're imposing something on reality. No, all you are doing is implicitly identifying a fact. You are saying, this range of things is relevant to me in a way these other things aren't. And so whether it's perceptual or conceptual, you separate it out. Now, on the perceptual level, this is true of, let's say, sufficiently successful organisms. The vast majority of mutations do not produce beneficial forms of awareness, and those creatures die out. So creatures that have existed for a long time, their whole system is oriented around what helps them survive. Now, even if it didn't, their awareness isn't wrong. It's just like highlighting the wrong line in your textbook. The information's still right. It's just not the information that's relevant to your survival, or it's not enough information. So you can go wrong in that way, but you never get false information from perception. You just might not get the information you need in order to survive, but you have to understand this. Because if you don't understand this, you're going to go down Peterson's route, and it's going to confuse you. When you draw lines, when you distinguish, when you create categories, when you say rock versus dirt versus tree, or justice versus injustice, or whatever, that is not subjective. You are doing that on the basis of a factual relationship between your factual life and the factual external world. You're identifying a relationship. Now, that's not in the definition or whatever you're talking about. It's implicitly in there because definitions are based on values. But again, that's not subjective. It's just that what's relevant to you is your life. So those aspects of reality you're interested in thinking about and demarcating are those that are relevant to your life. But what's relevant to your life is a factual issue. It's not this pragmatic thing. And so what Peterson wants to do is separate things out. So we have a different definition of truth. Truth is what aids your survival. And that's different from fact for him. But that is an enormous mistake. Because the beliefs that aid your life are the true ones. Are the ones based on fact. Because you live in it, you are a factual being in a factual world. So he wants to separate it out so that you can believe things that aren't factually true in a way that aids your survival. But what aids your survival is knowledge of what's factually true. Now, maybe, I hesitate even to say this because I'm not sure it's legitimate to even give this any kind of standing, but maybe if you're deliriously sick, there are very rare occasions where you may have to be told a lie or not believe the truth in order to survive. But those are rare and necessarily temporary. If they were long-term, you'd just die because you can't live long range on the basis of a falsehood. Because things are what they are, which is precisely what Peterson doesn't understand and said earlier is not obvious. Yes, it is obvious. Things are what they are, and that's what you need to know in order to survive. And the fact that that gives you a motivation to highlight certain parts of reality is not subjective, and it does not create reality. Anyway, thank you, Jordan, for bringing this to my attention, but hopefully now you will understand what's wrong with everything you believe. Next up, I have Sam Harris and Thaddeus Russell and Dennis Prager and everybody else. Because everyone is wrong about everything. So I'll see you when I deal with the next person.